for more people to come on. Hey everyone, I'm live. So I decided to do a live video today because I had a few workshops this week that unfortunately because of the snow, not able to do so. So for those of you who are on the East Coast and you're checking through this snow, please be safe, stay warm, and get some self-care in. That's my tips for you guys. So as you can see in the background, I have my shirts here. They're $15. I have one on right now. Therapy is my therapy. Hey, Artistry by Dana. Hey, Dana. Dana, this video is actually for you because you requested this topic for today. So I'm glad that you're able to tune in. So I guess I'll get started. I see some people coming on live on my Facebook and my Instagram. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Iris Mendez. I am a licensed social worker in the state of Pennsylvania, working on my clinical licensure, getting that soon, speaking it into existence. I am also a certified wellness coach, and I am a local social worker in Pennsylvania as well. And I run my own business, which is Find Your Will Wellness and Counseling Solutions, LLC. Here you go, this is my logo. For those of you who are just tuning in, I decided to go live today because I had two workshops lined up this week. Both of them actually on wellness. And so unfortunately, I wasn't able to get those workshops done. Shout out to At Work the Connect for allowing me to utilize their space to do a workshop. It's postponed, so we'll get back to you on dates and times, but it is a workshop series there, in addition to workshop series at East Eagle Yoga over in Havertown, Pennsylvania. So if you are in the area, Philadelphia and Havertown, please come out and support. I'll be posting info on those workshop series on my Instagram, on my Facebook, and if you're on my newsletter, if you're not on my newsletter, drop your email below in the comments and I'll add you. That way you can stay up to date on like everything that I'm doing. So the latest programs, wellness products, willpower products, which are behind me here. So if you want to stay updated, shoot me your email. If you don't want to post it here, feel free to send me an email, iris@findyourwillwellness.com. Again, that's IRIS@findyourwillwellness.com. Hey, Victor, over on Instagram. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Trinita, I see. Thank you. Okay. So today the topic is going to be on emotional wellness. And Dana, shout out to Dana who does my hair in Clinton, New Jersey. Yes, I drive 2 hours all the way to Lush Beauty Bar in Clinton, New Jersey to do my hair. And I will be seeing her soon so that she can, tame this for me. So shout out to Dana for doing my hair. Check her out if you're in Clinton, New Jersey. So the topic that we're dealing with today is emotional wellness. And I'm going to talk more so about post-traumatic stress disorder. The question was, how do you deal with, quote, post-traumatic stress disorder and, quote, social anxiety? So those two are a little bit different, I guess, diagnosis, if you will. So for today, I'm just going to focus on PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, what that means for emotional wellness. Love you too, Dana. So what is PTSD? I know that typically when people think of PTSD, they think of primarily veterans or people who are involved in some kind of a war. And actually that's where PTSD kind of, the terminology for that was coined after a lot of, people in the service came back and they would experience these symptoms that was called post-traumatic stress disorder. But you don't have to necessarily be in war, in an actual war, a service war, in order to experience post-traumatic stress disorder. And so I got a list here of things, and I'm actually going to pull from the DSM, my notes from the DSM-5. For those of you who don't know, it's the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Mental Health Disorders. So I'm going to pull from that as well. So I'm going to just write, I made a bullet point of what trauma looks like. And so trauma can be sexual abuse. Trauma can be being inappropriately touched. You know, the Me Too movement. Me too. Yeah, me too. Trauma can be physical abuse. Trauma could be emotional, psychological, mental abuse. This can be from a significant other. This can be from a caregiver, especially if it's from a caregiver or parental figure. And this could also be in school for like school violence for adolescents or kids who are experiencing bullying. So that can lead to PTSD. Neglect of any form. Neglect. When you think of the word neglect, you think of your basic needs in life. So you need food, you need water to survive. You need shelter. So if at any point in your life you were neglected of that, even emotional neglect in a sense, sometimes that can be traumatic. And so when you think about trauma, it's very individually based. And so what happens to one person, it may affect them, but the very same thing can happen to another person and it not affect them as much. And so that's something that you want to be mindful of as well, is that, trauma is very individually based. And so an accident, in a car accident, I myself have been in car accidents, and one in particular left me very traumatized, where I experienced some symptoms, and I'll go into the symptoms. I experienced symptoms as a result of that car accident. Assault could be, community violence. Again, it could be, that's something that I experienced as well. On my way to work one day in Philadelphia, I was assaulted by a man who, was a strange man. To this day, I don't know what it is that he wanted, but mental health was involved because he was actually what's called 302 in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, which is involuntary placement or committed to psychiatric inpatient facility. So he was actually 302. So there you go. He had his own mental health, and he had assaulted me. So as a result, I now carry around mace, and I might be a little bit more hyper vigilant. Again, these are symptoms I'm going to go into as to what trauma is and where and how it can affect us. So trauma could be a chronic medical illness that you experience or that a loved one experienced. Maybe you're taking care of that person, and now you're kind of overwhelmed over those feelings. Similarly, if it's yourself and you now have to go through certain medical procedures, that can be traumatic as well. Victims of violence or a witness to a violence. So when I used to work as a forensic interviewer, I would interview children who were witnesses to certain crimes. And so that could be traumatic to the child, to having witnessed that. Witnessing abuse as a child, witnessing interpersonal violence, being a victim of interpersonal violence or domestic violence, that in itself can also be traumatic. Generational trauma. Now, this one's a little tricky one, as the DSM-5 doesn't really touch up on this, and so for me, I like to add it because when you think of generational trauma, you think of trauma that your family members have gone through and that you may have overheard, or that you may have you may have experienced in utero. So what that means is if your mom was suffering through traumatic events while you were inside of her, that could potentially also lead to some trauma within yourself. And that's a little bit tricky to touch on, but there are some studies that have shown that, or are starting to show that that generational trauma does exist. I mean, think about generational trauma for our ancestors, ancestors who were enslaved or who may have suffered through a lot of trauma, physical abuse, sexual abuse. And so that could affect us as well, especially if we hear it a lot. For those of us in the helping profession or in the mental health field, one of the things that they talk about with us is vicarious trauma, and that vicarious trauma is just from hearing stories over and over of traumatic events happening to our clients, and then now we suffer some sort of psychological or symptoms as a result of it. They tell us to be careful for that. That's why self-care is something that is really, really, really huge in the helping profession, to make sure that we all take care of ourselves. And vicarious trauma could also be a family member or something. I actually had a client one time who had suffered vicarious trauma from having heard her significant other's traumatic events that they endured, and so as a result that elicited some symptoms within her. And so you want to be mindful of that too. A catastrophic event, think about Puerto Rico, all those people who have been without light, food, basic needs, suffering neglect in a sense, because of a natural disaster. So any catastrophic events or natural disaster, war, anything like that can also elicit traumatic, can also be trauma, and it could also be clinically PTSD. Loss of a loved one, and that could be a loss of a loved one, whether they passed away or whether you're separated from that person. That, say you had a family member that you were really close with, and now that person moved to a different country, and so you don't see them as much. You can suffer some trauma from that. You can suffer some separation from that, some grief, definitely grief through that. So any loss of a loved one, even pets. Sometimes people grieve as a result of losing items, family heirlooms and things that really meant something to them. And so those events can also be traumatic. Any displacement or forced displacement, house fires, things like that, things that you have to adjust to that you weren't necessarily expecting to adjust to, that can be traumatic. Parents or exposure to loved ones with mental health disorders. So being exposed to a loved one, especially a significant other who has a mental health disorder, or who is suffering through drug and alcohol abuse, or drug and alcohol use. So those are things that could also be traumatic, especially in children who witness that. That can, they're more likely to have their own mental health symptoms or mental health diagnosis, mental health needs as a result when they become adults. And so the way that trauma, our brain is really, really amazing, because there's this thing called neuroplasticity, and we adapt to our lifestyle, we adapt to our environment. And I'm such a nerd when it comes to the brain, even though I can't all the time retain all the information I want to. But as far as our brain goes, just the brain itself is of interest to me, and how we function, especially brain and behavior. And so how trauma affects the brain, it can affect our memory, it can affect our executive functioning, which doesn't allow us to be able to organize things the way that we want to effectively. It can affect our impulse control, our emotion regulation, and trauma can also affect, more importantly, our amygdala, which is a part of our brain that sets off our fight, flight, or freeze response. And so in those situations, for example, say you're feeling like you're threatened somehow, so you're fearful of something. An example I'll give is I actually just watched a video earlier today, a TED Talk, where they talked about if you were to be in a forest and you saw a bear standing in front of you, your amygdala gets set off automatically, and you go into that mode where all these chemicals in your body start to tell you to either fight or flight, and so or freeze even. And so the way that trauma affects our brain is that if you are subjected to all of the things that, or even one of the things that I mentioned earlier, from abuse, neglect, all that, if you are subjected to that, even one time, or if you're constantly subjected to that, then that part of your brain is signaling off most of the time. And so that means that most of the time you're either in fight mode or you're in flight mode. You're trying to bail out, or you're frozen. You don't know what to do. And so this is especially seen in victims of domestic violence. Domestic violence victims. It's also seen in people who experience sexual abuse. And so some of the symptoms, I'll go into it. Some of the symptoms that you may experience are flashbacks, nightmares, night terrors, night sweats, some physiological responses. So even if there's a perceived experience that looks similar to whatever traumatic event that you had, you may start to see those physiological responses where your heart may start to race, you may start to sweat, you may start to ball up your fist because you're ready to fight, you may start to get ready to leave, exit, look at the doors, you're very hypervigilant, you're looking around your shoulders. A lot of victims of so like burglaries and things like that, like if someone suffered a burglary or a house break-in, they're very hypervigilant as well. So that could be a traumatic event. This can also cause delusions. So it can cause our minds to kind of make up scenarios that things are happening when they really aren't happening. You start to predict things. Obviously, you can't predict the future, so but that could be a symptom. You start to have cognitive distortions, and that's also called thinking traps or negative thinking, unhelpful thinking patterns. If you just Google unhelpful thinking patterns or negative thinking traps, it's going to come up. And you can look through them and see which ones you identify with the most. And sometimes when you look at that, I say be very careful. And they're the most common unhelpful thinking styles. So don't beat yourself up if you find yourself identifying with a lot of them, because they're common. That means that a lot of people think this way. And so don't beat yourself up if you find that this is happening to you. And if you realize this yourself, then my suggestion is to seek some therapy where you can work with a therapist one-on-one to kind of help you combat those negative thoughts. And if you need help navigating the system, holla at me. Let me know. Shoot me an email and I can help you navigate the behavioral health system. Or if possible, if there's no conflict of interest, then obviously we may be able to work together in a therapeutic formal relationship. And so some of the other things that you may experience, some impulse control, so inability to control your impulses, inability to control your emotions, panic attacks, substance abuse. And so these are just some of these symptoms. And so, excuse me, so I have a little bit of a cold here. So some of the things that the DSM-5, this is my handy-dandy DSM-5 overview. So I'll read it off to you. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a condition that lasts at least 1 month and results from experiencing actual or threatened death, serious injury, sexual violence, as manifested by at least one of the following: directly experiencing or witnessing a traumatic event or events, becoming aware of close friends or family members suffering a traumatic event or events, repeated exposure to aversion aspects of traumatic events. Intrusion symptoms. So these are intrusive symptoms. Presence of at least one of the following after experienced traumatic events: reoccurring distressing memories of the events, frequent nightmares involving the traumatic events, flashbacks that may be accompanied by dissociative reactions as if the individual were reliving the traumatic event. And so what that means is that sometimes when people are having these memories, and I've actually witnessed this in one of my family members, where they were talking about a traumatic event that they experienced, and when she was telling me what had happened to her, it was almost as if she was reliving it in the moment, and she was just disassociated from where she was and in reality, and it was almost as if she was back in that moment and it was happening all over again. And I'll talk about some ways to help that as well. But again, this isn't a therapy session. This isn't the treatment. This is just information that I'm giving you. So if you experience this, please, please, please seek a professional that you can build a rapport with and that you can talk to one-on-one, and work through this, because this is just information that I'm giving you guys, and I'm doing this because one, I've told myself I'm going to start doing more live videos, and I haven't, and two, I was supposed to do workshops this week, and unfortunately they're not happening. So this is my way of giving back and being able to have my voice heard and share the knowledge that I have. So we'll get back to the actual intrusive symptoms here. Flashbacks that may be accompanied by dissociative reactions as if the individual were reliving traumatic events, intense reactive distress when in the presence of cues that serve of reminders of traumatic events. So, for example, I mentioned a car accident that I was in. This was in 2015. I was hit by a, it's not a tractor truck, but it was like a cargo truck behind me. The car, I'm like thinking about it, and it's like bringing back so many memories. But basically, the truck hit me, and as a result, when I drive now, I get nervous when I'm approaching like a stop, or I'm approaching, or I even see that kind of truck. In my mind, I start to think, is this person behind me going to stop in time? Because that's what happened with this truck. This truck didn't stop in time, and as a result, the truck hit me. And then I downward spiraled into like, my own depression, and I'm okay with admitting that. As a mental health professional, it's okay for us to not be prideful and say that we don't suffer through our own stuff. We're human too. So, as a result, now driving I'm better with the anxiety as a result of driving, but initially it was really hard. And for those of you who knew me around that time, or were supportive through that time, you know that it was hard for me. And so that's an intense reactive distress. So for me, it's not as intense as it used to be. Severe psychological, and it's not as severe as it used to be, severe physiological reactions upon exposure to cues. So I'm not experiencing the hand sweatings anymore. I'm not experiencing the heart palpitation as much. Avoidance symptoms, chronic avoidant behaviors beginning after occurrence of traumatic events as manifested by at least one of the following attempts to avoid distressing thoughts, feelings, or memories reminiscent of the traumatic event. Avoidance of external stimuli that may serve as a reminder of the traumatic event. So, for example, I have some clients who they avoid going to maybe social aspects or social gatherings because something may have happened to them during a social gathering. So even going to the grocery store because there's too many people, or going to the gym at certain times of day because there's too many people, triggers them. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how to combat that as well. And so that is one of the symptoms. Negative mood. If you have any questions while I'm doing this, please feel free to shoot them. I'm going to try my best to scroll along here and read while you guys are watching. Thank you to those who are tuning in. If you like this content, or if you feel that it will be beneficial to someone, please share it. I'm going to take a sip of water here. Hashtag find your will. So, avoidance symptoms, we just went through negative mood, negative transformations of moods or thoughts related to traumatic events with onset after the event transpired and manifested by at least two of the following. So dissociative amnesia, inability to remember details of the traumatic event. So this happens in a lot of victims of sexual assaults. They're unable to really remember a lot of the events, and that's our defense mechanisms kind of suppressing certain parts of it because you don't want to recognize that it happened or that it's real. Chronic and exceedingly negative attitudes and expectations about oneself, others, or surroundings. Self-blame, blaming others due to chronic inaccurate thoughts about the cause or effect of the traumatic event. Chronic negative affect, which is mood. Loss of interest in significant activities. Alienation from others, chronic inability to experience positive affect. So you're depressed, you're not able to have a positive mood anymore. Arousal symptoms. So these are the psychosomatic, physiological responses that you can experience, significant changes in sensitivity to traumatic events starting or worsening after the traumatic events, as indicated by at least 2 of the following. So you have to have 2 to meet the criteria for PTSD. Unprovoked irritability and temper tantrums. So, you know, you're irritable, but it's not really provoked. Irresponsible self-destructive activities, hypervigilance, and irresponsible self-destructive activities. That's so broad. Let me go into that. That could be gambling. That could be excessive shopping. That could be drug use. Hypervigilance. So just being at a heightened state, you know, you're out walking and you're paranoid about the person walking next to you. You think they might do something to you. Heightened startled reaction. So some of my clients, they can't hear like even something as simple as like a banging or like a knocking. They'll like automatically just react to it. It's very startled. Difficulty in focusing and concentrating. Disruptive sleep patterns. And this condition may be accompanied by other mental health disorders. And so some of the things that I wanted to talk about, and I don't want to take up a lot of time because I'm already at 26 minutes here live. So some of the things that that I want to talk about is treatment. So if you just Google these, and I can write them down. EMDR. EMDR is a good therapy for PTSD. Cognitive behavioral therapy for PTSD. I've actually done a training on that. What else? Mindfulness-based stress reduction can help the symptoms of PTSD. And so if you're seeking treatment, please look into these. Again, that's EMDR, CBT for PTSD, and MBSR, so mindfulness-based stress reduction. And some of the things that you can do within yourself if you're experiencing this is just reality tests. A lot of times, one of my supervisors gave me this tip to tell my clients is to fact check reality. It's called reality testing in the psych world. So reality testing or fact checking, you wanna place yourself in a court of law. So pretend that you are in front of a judge. Pretend that you are, and sometimes this is hard to do. Pretend that you are in front of a lawyer and the lawyer is asking you a question in a sense. You can't prove that, you know, the person that you're walking next to is going to possibly do something. You can't prove it. I mean, you have a suspicion based on your experience or your traumatic event, but you can't prove it. So reality test yourself or reality check yourself. Can I prove this? Is this fact? And so that's one way that you can do it to kind of help alleviate that. Another way is to practice some grounding techniques that help you really center yourself. So one of my favorite things to do with my clients is back to the basics, the mindful senses. So name some things that you see, hear, smell, taste, feel. Like right now, I'm feeling this chair that I'm sitting on is hard. I'm feeling congested. I see a lamp. I see all these wonderful people right now watching me. And so, you know, bring yourself back to center, back to where you are to kind of get yourself grounded, especially for those people who are having like those disassociative states. And then practice some deep breathing techniques. If you're having anxiety related to going somewhere, because there's too many people or something like that. One thing that that I have, you know, told a client to do in that aspect is, you know, you got to go to the grocery store, right? Make a list of what you have to go get. Go at a time where you know there's going to be less people there, and you know, stick to your list. Map out the store if you're familiar with the store. Map it out so that you know where you need to get what from, so that it's less anxious for you. You spend less time there. And bring headphones in your phone. You can have one earbud in and one earbud out. That way you can still be aware of your surroundings by sense of sound or hearing. And keep the other one in, and the other one could have your favorite song or some meditative music or even an audio book that you're listening to or a podcast. So those are just some ways that you can combat that anxiety that you may experience as a result of a traumatic event. And so with that said, I'll leave it open right now for questions if anyone has any questions. Once again, my name is Iris. You can visit my website at www.findyourwillwellness.com. I am a wellness therapist, a licensed social worker in the state of Pennsylvania, working on my clinical licensure. And I just want to help empower people and heal people. That's really what my journey is. Before I let you go, some things to mention. Workshops coming up at Work the Connect, so make sure you follow at Work the Connect. The Healthier You Conference, I will be speaking there on May 11th in Philadelphia. I have workshop series coming up at East Eagle Yoga in Havertown. The next one is April 27th and then May 18th. And then workshops at Rutgers University in Camden on March 29th and April 11th. And if you're interested in my empowerment, willpower shirts rather, therapy is my therapy. $15 today. I'm wearing the one in gray now. I do have unisex and V-neck. And then self-love. Unfortunately, I don't have many of these left. I have one large, two extra large in V-neck, and then 3 extra large in black, and they're $15. I do take PayPal and Square Cash. So if you're interested in those, please send me an email, iris@findyourwillwellness.com. Follow me on Instagram. If you're on Facebook watching me and you're not following my Instagram, @findyourwillwellness. If you're on Instagram and you don't like Find Your Will Wellness on Facebook, please do so. And with that, I am out. Everyone enjoy this snow day. Stay warm and stay safe. And find your will.